All right, we're back looking at Dr. Walden's paper on predicting car prices, focusing on whether there are restrictions on the number of dealers or not. And so it all comes down to these two variables, RMA have and RMA have times pop growth. Now, a couple of things to notice here. We have a dummy variable, which will change the y-intercept if they have a restriction on the number of dealers in a city. But also, this dummy variable is interacted with population growth. Now, I just noticed this. Normally, when you have a dummy variable and then you also multiply the dummy variable times a continuous variable like this. Remember, go back and review when we did this with horsepower and whether it's a domestic car. Usually you end up with three variables in your equation: the dummy variable, the continuous variable, population growth. This represents how many more people live in an area now versus sometime in the past. Um, and he's made the units in thousands here. So usually you have the dummy variable, the continuous variable, and then also this interaction. Now in this paper, Dr. Walden chose to just use the dummy variable and what we call the interaction term, but did not include the population growth. Now since I'm not accustomed to seeing the two terms and not including the population growth, I'm interested in exploring what this means a little bit more. And we're going to do this in just a minute. I'm going to go to Excel and we're going to explore what do these coefficients of minus 164 and minus 0.24 mean. We'll look at a couple of different examples and how that affects the price. Now, let's look at the rest of the paper here and then come back to making sure we understand what those coefficients mean. Now, Dr. Walden tells us what some of these slopes mean. One of the most fascinating ones I see is the dealer price. Where's the dealer price variable? Dealer invoice price right here. I think this is interesting, this 1.19 coefficient. Now take a minute and explain to yourself, what does that mean? What are the units of the explanatory variable and what are the units of the dependent variable? Well, they're both in dollars. So this 1.19 tells us that as the dealer invoice price goes up by $1, the price of the vehicle goes up by $1.19. And this is interesting because you might expect, before you think about it, that if the dealer price goes up by $1, why does the price not go up by $1 that the dealer charges me? Markup, my friends, markup. And so that means that for every dollar you see on a dealer invoice, you're probably going to see a price of about 19 cents, 19% higher than that. So it's a 19% markup. And Dr. Walden does a really nice job of explaining that in this section. I'm glad to see that. As something missing in a lot of economics papers is this intuition, this explanation of what the slopes mean. And he does a good job of doing all that. So after interpreting what the slopes mean and telling what conclusion he has for his hypothesis that letting the restrictions on the number of dealers, how does that affect the price? He kind of sums it up and then gives the implications and conclusions. What did he learn and how can we use this information in the real world? And then lastly, let's just go down here and after he sums up, he has his references. Also a very important part of any research project, you do the literature review and you document in your references the sources of your data as well as those other papers that you reviewed. And you do this for a couple of reasons. Number one, you have to give credit where credit's due. And number two, you want to give people the ability to go back and look at what you learned. You need to give people this enough information so that they could go find the data and the papers that you learned from so that they can build on what you learned. So it's important to tell people where you learned this information and where they can find these papers that you read. And in my opinion, it's not as important the format of your references, whether it's APA or MLA, but the fact that you have a complete set of references for all of the information that you used that's important in your paper. Now, I want to go, as I said, I want to go back and look. This is a good example of a paper. You can see all of the parts documented that you want to see. But again, since I'm a little uncertain, I haven't seen or I haven't done this in the past where I have a dummy variable and then I only have this interaction, but then I don't also just have the population growth by itself. I want to explore that with you for a couple of minutes.